I'm Lynn Packer, and this is my take on how America's ever-worsening local journalism crisis might be resolved. Is it possible that a solution centered on smartphone newsgathering could succeed? We've seen headlines like these for years. Even after multiple, badly failed attempts to stem the crisis, no strategy has even slowed the free fall. 2 years ago, a University of North Carolina Journalism School white paper called the decline of local news an extinction-level threat, an increasingly dire situation, an accelerated decline in local newspapers, a collapse of the country's local news ecosystem, the leaving behind surviving ghost newspapers, and the report took swipes at local broadcast news. Television news is not filling the void. Vivian Schiller, who's been an executive with CNN, the New York Times, NPR, and NBC, says the pandemic made things even worse.
So the pandemic has turned what was a crisis into what is now pretty much a catastrophe. Tens of thousands of journalists, just since the pandemic began, have been laid off, furloughed, or had their salaries cut.
How bad is it? It's so bad that crisis is a weak descriptive. Crisis was applicable 10 years ago. Now add the word beyond. Beyond a crisis. Beyond catastrophic. If anything, the local news free fall is accelerating. And still no end in sight. Take, for example, Gannett, the nation's largest newspaper chain. 2 years ago, 613 newspapers were in the Gannett chain. In 2022, the number was down by 126. Then by the end of 2022, more massive layoffs, prompting stories like this. Even Gannett's USA Today ran the story. The nation's largest newspaper chain is a penny stock. That's how the market rates local newspaper journalism. How low could Gannett's share price fall? It fell below $2 during COVID, rebounded some last year, but dropped again to trading around $1.90. That's in deep penny stock territory. So much for Gannett's pivot to video and digital-first rescue attempts. The pivot to video trend, and it was really more like a fad, began in 2015 with news media companies cutting staff resources for written content, generally published on their own websites, in favor of short-form video content, often published on third-party platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Snapchat, and TikTok. The scandal erupted when Facebook revealed it had artificially inflated numbers to its advertisers about how long viewers watched video ads, which created a false impression that there was customer demand for additional video content. It was a scandal widely covered by the press. More than a decade ago, Gannett made a so-called pivot to video. One story was titled, Gannett, Video Now the Most Valuable Asset for Monetization and Preferred Medium for Telling News Stories for Media Leader. The story said, video is becoming the medium of choice to tell a compelling news story. Reporters in the field are able to shoot, edit, and upload video themselves in real time with little overhead or technical skills required. What? Little technical skills required? Somebody at Gannett didn't know much about professional news video. Gannett's video initiative set the stage for dozens, maybe hundreds of other print news outlets who by 2015 were trying to incorporate video on their websites. Just prior to the video pivot, Gannett laid off 700 newspaper division employees. Thus, at the time of the pivot, there were fewer reporters called on to do more. Other headlines: Gannett layoffs are a leading indicator of a permanently shrinking newspaper business. Gannett layoffs accelerated demise of in-Jersey hyperlocal news sites. But as Gannett was disinvesting in reporters, it was investing in video. Fast forward 9 years to the 2020 UNC white paper I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. It proposed policies to address the local journalism crisis, but video was not part of any proposal. Not at all. No analysis of the infamous pivot to video debacles from about 2015 to 2018. Nothing about video journalism, where solo reporters, VJs, shoot their own video. Nothing about smartphones, either as a news gathering device or a news delivery device, and nothing about 5G. Maybe the UNC report's authors believe new technologies like smartphones and 5G are making things worse. Steve Waldman with the Report for America nonprofit claims technology has worsened, not improved things. He asks, are ongoing new technology advancements helping or hurting local journalism?
And I'd say things have gotten worse than expected, despite the alarmism of that, because even back then there was a little bit of sense of like, okay, things are bad, but some new model's going to come along. Some new app is going to be invented. We can't predict the future of technology. Some new technological solution is going to happen. And it hasn't. No. In fact, the technology has worked in the other direction. The more digital technology has improved, the more it has made it easier for advertisers to not advertise in local media.
I believe that mobile technologies can and should help turn the tide. Smartphone news gathering has been hiding in plain sight for more than a decade. Smartphones deployed with supporting technologies and practices have the potential to not only restore local journalism, but take it to new pre-crisis heights. Why smartphones at the center of a solution? Ever since Steve Jobs revolutionized smartphones with cameras and internet access, they've been deployed around the world for news gathering, sometimes by two-man teams, photographer and reporter, but more often by VJs, reporters working solo, so-called one-man bands or mojos, mobile journalists. Even though smartphone video news gathering is widely practiced, far and away most of its potential remains untapped. Fully harnessing that capability could be a key to stopping the decline of local journalism, and once stopped, reinventing it. So back to the question. Could a smartphone-oriented video news gathering concept succeed where other rescue measures have failed? Yes, as I said, with supporting technologies and methods. What technologies and methods could boost smartphone power? Beginning, of course, with apps loaded on smartphones that enable shooting, editing, and then transmitting via the internet. Apps like LumaFusion, iMovie, Filmic Pro, and KineMaster. 5G, 4G plus bonded cellular, getting live and recorded video from the field to the newsroom or directly to news consumers. IP, that is internet transmissions, replace those via ENG microwave and SNG satellite trucks. Artificial intelligence, like speech-to-text software. Voice recognition is an example that not only aids in-field video production for creating voiceovers, but also facilitates in-field creation of text-only stories, and not yet invented AI, such as video editing aids, and practices examples, hyper-focus on local news, proactive, not reactive pursuit of news, beat reporting, strict journalism standards such as Chinese walls between editorial and advertising, video journalism, solo teams, all reporters are well-trained VJs, field editing on portable devices and computers, no edit bays, nonlinear news delivery, no studios, no news sets, no anchors, frequent, authentic, 24/7 live reporting, no phony so-called black hole live shots. More on that coming up. And finally, print on screens, not newsprint, remains important. Video would not replace print, but supplement it. In addition to my television news reporting, teaching, and consulting experience, I also freelanced for print, winning 4 first-place awards in the print investigative reporting category, which underscores my belief print is not going away, with an emphasis on video. It is true that a picture can be worth 1,000 words, and sometimes video could be worth even more. But it's also true that quite often, a few words can be worth 1,000 pictures. Okay, back to video, breaking down some of the technologies and practices I just listed, a little more detail about how they can cut costs and speed news delivery, beginning with video journalism. Of course, it's where a reporter shoots and edits his or her own video and is one of the keys to resolving the local news crisis. The VJ concept goes way back in time to film journalism days. I began my television reporting career in 1968 as a video journalist, or back then a film journalist, using a 16-millimeter handheld camera that only shot silent film. At that time, it was unimaginable that there would be a much smaller, lighter, more powerful device that could capture video and audio, edit the video, transmit it to the newsroom or directly to the internet, and even replace far more expensive, low-mobility ENG and SNG trucks. The 9 years I taught broadcast journalism at Brigham Young University, all broadcast journalism majors were taught to be video journalists, even though most of their first jobs were at local stations that used two-man teams, where reporters would not shoot and edit their own video. The sequential core instruction consisted of basic journalism, basic broadcast news reporting, basic broadcast news videography, advanced broadcast journalism, and senior seminar, broadcast news. Student stories were broadcast weeknightly on the university's PBS channel. The takeaway: VJ skills cannot be mastered with just a couple of workshops. Probably one reason, among others, that Gannett's and other newspaper pivots to video were disasters. Next, there is no substitute for putting boots on the ground, in the field, wearing out shoe leather. There is no hyper-local journalism without it. Enterprise reporting is a subset of beat reporting. It's where journalists proactively seek the news, not reactively over-rely on press releases, wire services, and police scanners. Far less time is spent in the newsroom, far more time in the field. Most of you watching this video know the typical beats that are governed by the number and skill level of staff, each community's characteristics and news consumer preferences, city and county government, politics, justice system, courts, entertainment and culture, academics, education, sports, personal fitness, business consumerism, and crime, accidents, and disasters. Despite its importance, as one report about covering local government says, beat reporting is dying. Beat reporting, the day-to-day coverage of a particular field, allowing a journalist to develop expertise and cultivate sources, has been gutted. You have to have a reporter at every city hall meeting. There's no way around that. There's no shortcut there. Gone are the beat reporters who made the rounds, sniffed out sweetheart deals as they were unfolding, or put the fear of God in officials so they wouldn't dare attempt malfeasance. I was taught beat reporting in college as a journalism major. I established the beat system when I was editor of my campus newspaper. I practiced it as a television news reporter for KSL in Utah, one stint as city-county reporter, and 2 times as State House correspondent. I taught it as an instructor at BYU and at the University of Dortmund in Germany. I advocated beat reporting when I consulted for German television news. During the 70s and 80s, KSL was a dominant #1 in the Utah market, and was twice named Best Local Television Newscast in the nation. KSL's beat system, called News Specialists, was heavily promoted, was even incorporated in the News Open.
Live from Salt Lake City, you're watching the News Specialists. Dick Norse, Shelley Thomas, Bob Welty with weather, and Jim Nance with sports.
The beat system, literally, is textbook journalism. These are some of the textbooks I used at BYU. All, of course, advocated beat reporting. I also taught beat reporting at the University of Dortmund using this textbook, A Germany Standard. Once when I was in Munich, I met with the author to compare notes. I included a section on beat reporting in the training manual I wrote for smartphone news gathering workshops. Again, there is no substitute for beat reporting. Now more detail about the technology behind smartphone news gathering, the centerpiece of a game plan to revive local journalism, because it's far more mobile, far quicker, and way less expensive than minicams, editing bays, and remote trucks. The smartphone is a highly mobile, all-in-one device that, with accessories like microphones and lights, replaces minicams, edit bays, audio booths, and microwave and satellite, that is, ENG and SNG remote trucks. To transmit video from the scene, smartphone news gathering uses IP networks, which replace legacy video links like satellite and microwave. The transmission of live edited or raw video begins at the reporter's smartphone. The video data, the signal, is transmitted to a cell tower or via Wi-Fi or hardwire connector to a local area network, or by bonding several to maximize bandwidth. The video can pass through the newsroom under editorial control or directly to news consumers' handheld devices and smart TVs, thus end-to-end with smartphones. Pew Research confirms the fact that most news consumers now get their news digitally on small screens. The transition of news from print, television, and radio to digital spaces is also reflected in the ways individual Americans say they are getting their news. More than 8 in 10 U.S. adults say they get news from a smartphone, computer, or tablet. As I mentioned before, bonded cellular devices can be important in transmitting especially live video when a single cell phone connection lacks sufficient bandwidth, say from a breaking news story scene where perhaps dozens of cell phone calls are eating up bandwidth. There are several brands and types of devices that combine 2 or even more internet connections to enable higher resolution video and reduce chances of signal failure. As 5G service becomes more widespread, cellular bonding will be less important in some instances. In 2017, working with the company LiveView, I developed a prototype device where the streaming module is mounted directly on a rig with the smartphone, instead of being mounted on a tripod or carried in a backpack. The prototype included a light, microphone, remote switch, bracket, connecting cable, and the LiveView unit, all on the same rig. Part of a plan to cut costs and save time is the field editing concept. Television news departments have talked about doing more on-site video production for decades, mostly in conjunction with microwave and satellite trucks, not usually done for routine non-live reporting. There were no portable editors until the late 90s. Sony introduced the digital videotape portable field editing system for news, and Panasonic marketed the mobile field edit station. It was a potential big step forward, but still required microwave or satellite links to feed video to the station. When Sony introduced its field editor in 1998, I conducted workshops for its use in Germany, mainly because American-style video editing is quicker and more precise on the hardware than German-style editing. It was great technology, but TV news departments in the States and Germany shrugged it off and stuck to their existing time and money wasteful workflows. Smartphone newsgathering can change that. Today, most television news departments continue to do very little field editing. Even more perplexing, most live shots from the field are not even for breaking news, but instead so-called black hole live shots done for theatrics, not journalism. In a smartphone newsgathering future, the field-to-station connection would be used mostly to transmit video and edited news stories to the newsroom. And again, ideally, most live shots would be for actual breaking news, any time of day, not just during scheduled newscasts. Harvard's Nieman Journalism Foundation published a video about video journalist Alexander Trowbridge editing news footage on a smartphone in the field. As do some VJs, he uses a DSLR camera to shoot and then edit on a smartphone. I recommend, however, shooting with a smartphone. In this video, he locked himself in a barn in the middle of winter to edit.
I'm stuck in this barn, editing a video about hay, on my phone, and I can't leave until it's done. What if I convince the goat farmer next door to A, let me film a video in his barn about a building block of our larger food system that most people don't think about, and B, to lock me in that barn until I've finished editing that video on my phone as a means of demonstrating the power and pitfalls of editing in the field. After pulling together a makeshift desk, I do what I always do when beginning an edit. We'll start by importing some footage. To retrieve the video shot with my drone and camera, I use a card reader made for the iPhone. To move things along, I assemble a series of portable components, including a battery-powered monitor, foldable keyboard, and collapsible mouse, into what I call the field editor.
My name is Christopher Hahn.
Next, I sort through my footage. I set the beginning and end of clips that I might need, and then drop them onto my timeline.
It's going to be a mixture of grasses, legumes.
When I've identified the quotes that help me tell the story, and the secondary shots that help me illustrate it, I begin scripting my narration. Then I set up my microphone, and attempt to read my own handwriting.
What does that even mean?
My gear is covered in hay. As for the piece, I'm proud of it. And yet, for journalists who are curious about video editing, I would still recommend mobile editing as a good entry point. It costs less, it's less complicated, and you can do it from anywhere.
The next topic, filling the void, not only left by newspapers that died, but also the void left by not dead but dying ghost newspapers. Up until now, attempts to fill the void left by dead and dying newspapers has just been talk, with little, if any, success. A March 2022 article published by the Radio Television Digital News Association, RTDNA, was headlined, "News Desert, How Broadcast Journalism Can Fill the Void." It talked about a 60 Minutes report on how hedge funds are buying up local newspapers and gutting reporting staffs. The RTDNA column chastised 60 Minutes for not pointing out TV news is filling in. The article said, 60 Minutes could have also reported that in many of the so-called news deserts created by the post-Great Recession contraction of the local newspaper industry, local broadcast news organizations and companies have staffed up to fill some of the information gaps. They have poured millions of dollars into providing additional daily newscasts, as well as new and expanding digital, mobile, and OTT platforms, investigative reporting units, and other innovations specifically to serve local communities better. While there is a tiny bit of truth in these statements, it is mostly local TV news nonsense and marketing hype. Broadcasting and Cable Magazine, which has covered the television news industry for decades, pushes the same malarkey. An article said, with local print disappearing and deceptive websites proliferating, local television news needs to step up and fill the news hole. That part is true. It should step up. It said local newsrooms can rightfully claim to have held on to journalistic integrity and the trust of viewers. It is true the surveys consistently show local TV news is more trusted than newspapers. But it is wishful thinking to say local newsrooms have held on to journalistic integrity. It said executed well, television news can meet growing public demand for information, keep local political leaders accountable, and strengthen the grassroots of democracy. While there are a handful of excellent local TV news operations in the United States, any thought that most local TV news operations will fill a local news gap is a pipe dream. A Hussman Journalism School report talked about a 2011 FCC report that issued a clarion call for other media, both legacy and startup, to fill the void in local news left when newspapers either closed or severely cut back their coverage of an area. As of 2017, local and regional television newsrooms employ more journalists than do newspapers. In many ways, the nation's 1,700 licensed regional and local television stations seem the most obvious medium to fill the local news void. Then the piece goes on to say, viewership of the evening newscasts is declining and aging rapidly. In many ways, television stations have been a victim of their own success. As one general manager told the Knight Foundation, as long as profit margins remain high, there is less incentive to change. Even though TV stations have expanded the time allotted to news in many markets, the vast majority of those newscasts revolve around soft features, crime, weather, and sports. Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism is in agreement. While it warns that with local TV, disruption is coming, it points out that the money spigot is still on. A major factor inhibiting change in local TV news is that stations are still making impressive money from advertising and retransmission fees. Digital advertising revenue accounted for 7% of total ad revenue. That is, virtually all local television news outlets also post stories on the web, but most revenue comes from advertising during televised newscasts, not from nonlinear digital. There is little financial incentive for television to go all in digital. Take, for example, the Nexstar Media Group, the largest TV chain in the United States, which owns 200 stations and whose stock is publicly traded. Its stock price has been going up, not down like the nation's largest newspaper chain. Nexstar claims it has high journalism standards. It says in covering the news on both broadcast and digital platforms, the company practices strong journalistic standards. It says Nexstar prides itself in producing local and national news content that meets the highest standards of journalistic integrity. Saying it does not make it true, and it is not. Take, for example, KTVX, Nexstar's station in Utah. I picked a day at random to show the typical slant of KTVX's News 4 Utah coverage. One dead following West Valley City crash. Payson woman allegedly shoots woman and herself. Granite Park staffer allegedly slept with a student. Teenage woman arrested, suspected for Christmas arson. U of U fraternity terminated for probation violation. Mapleton garage fully engulfed in flames, home saved. And West Valley man shoots, kills roommate. It's why I give KTVX a journalism grade of D-. In 2001, the Columbia Journalism Review published results of a survey of 118 local television news directors. It reported that to pad profits, broadcasters cut budgets and staff while adding programs. And it talked about the well-known mantras, if it bleeds, it leads, and trash and flash. It said more than half local news advertisers try to tell them what to air and not to air. And they say the problem is growing. To meet profit demands, many news directors report they are having to produce a thinner and cheaper product by adding news programs while cutting their budgets. That has continued since 2001. The universal method that local television uses to deliver news is another reason it cannot fill the gap. I'll talk about the news show format, the use of multiple anchors, and a special section on black hole live shots. That December 2001 issue of Columbia Journalism Review that I referred to a couple of minutes ago made several recommendations for local television news. Cover more of the community, demonstrate more enterprise reporting, air more long stories and fewer very short ones, hire more staff and give them more time to develop stories. But it said the problem is that these ideas run counter to the prevailing wisdom in local TV, and that advice has gone largely unheeded for the last 22 years. Besides local television news generally engaging in low-quality journalism, its linear delivery method is way out of date. That is, news consumers have to tune in at a set time. Then stories are presented one by one, sequentially, in a row, in linear fashion. Viewers cannot choose when and what stories they want to watch. I want to emphasize the differences between linear and nonlinear delivery of video news. Linear is most often watched on a television set. Digital, most often on a smartphone, but also on smart TVs with integrated internet. They're now in more than 80% of U.S. homes. Access for television is linear, as we've discussed, nonlinear digital. Television uses the news show format. Digital news websites. Anchors introduce stories on television. It's anchorless on digital. The news consumer picks and chooses what they want, when they want. The number and length of stories is limited by time on television. There's no story number or length restrictions on the internet. And there are usually no live shots outside newscasts on television. You can have live shots anytime online. The news show format usually calls for 4 anchors, 2 for news, the dual anchor concept, and 1 for weather and another for sports. Frequently, a reporter also appears on set, or in the newsroom, or from the news scene. Television news consultant Al Primo originated and branded the news show format, also known as the eyewitness news format, in 1965 in Philadelphia. The concept featured banter among news anchors and reporters, banter dubbed Happy Talk. In 1970, Primo took his eyewitness news idea to WABC in New York. It's where the format's fame skyrocketed. In 1982, Primo was interviewed by, who else? 2 TV news anchors.
Well, have you ever wondered why your local station newscasters all seem to get along so well together? Why they smile so much, and why they do the kind of news stories they do? It may be because someone, such as our next guest, advised them to be that way.
He is Al Primo, founder of Primo News Service, a firm which specializes in consulting with TV stations. And
we'd like to begin with a look at what a consultant can do for a television news station's news department.
The final full day of campaigning is nearly over.
The big question to be raised tonight is, will it be King or Dukakis? Will it be Sears, Card, or Lakia? Remember, when the news happens tonight, we'll be there. Have a nice evening, and thank you for watching.
Good evening, everybody.
But the whole
whole idea there, and what we were trying to accomplish there, is to have a look that was more representative of WBZ in television. This is the station in Boston that had been there the longest. This is the station that has been the most stable station for years, the news leader, and was suddenly challenged by Channel 5 and faced the immediate prospect of a more severe challenge by the new operators of Channel 7.
In the 1970s, fancy news sets and multi-anchor news shows popped up everywhere. Iowa's Frank Magid jumped into the news consulting fray. In 1970, he introduced a competing action news format in Philadelphia. That was at the same station broadcasting American Bandstand. Of course, Magid included chatty co-anchors and short, fast-paced stories with the promise, it's tight, it's fast, and you don't miss a thing. Magid's consulting company grew much faster than Primo's. In 1974, Broadcasting Magazine published a story about TV news consultants, asking, are news doctors taking over TV journalism? It included statements from supporters and detractors, and from consultants like Magid, who said, it's very, very strange that broadcast journalists are in reality almost biting the hand that feeds them. Some of them have turned on us and not recognized that we have created the prominence they now enjoy. I was one of the journalists who was biting the hand, Magid's, that fed my station's news department. I was a reporter and assistant news director when Magid completely transformed KSL's TV news presentation. A lot for the better and a lot for worse. So I was an eyewitness to the early days of TV news doctoring. And speaking of eyewitness, a competing station, Channel 4, had already adopted the action news slogan. So Magid cribbed eyewitness news from Primo and conferred it on KSL Channel 5. On consultant advice, KSL, like hundreds of local television stations, added another anchor to read and intro stories. Soon, mostly male-female presenter pairs were dubbed Ken and Barbie, some even looking like Ken and Barbie. It was a trend so widespread and stereotypical, it was easy to spoof. The Mary Tyler Moore Show is based on a fictional local television newscast whose anchor, Ted Baxter, was a parody of a shallow, buffoonish TV personality. In one episode, his producer hired a second anchor to help liven up the newscast, prop up Baxter's mundane personality, and add some humor to their lead-ins.
Ted, please, no.
10 seconds.
Ted.
Get out of my way, Mayor. I've got personality, too.
Ted, you don't.
Think you're pretty good, eh, Gordo? Well, we'll see who's the funny guy around here.
We're on the air, Ted.
Guy came home to his Polish wife.
Massive freeway tie-up occurred when a man, dressed in a bunny suit, on his way home from an all-night costume party, got out of his car to change a tire. Hey, I wonder if a cop came along and made him hop a straight line.
I don't think that's funny.
Another development in Washington today, the president signed into law...
Hey, wait a minute. That's a president's story. That's mine. I think I'm supposed to do that, Gertie.
What's the difference, Ted? I've already started it.
But that it's a president's story. I was here first, and I always get the president's story.
The Mary Tyler Moore series began right when TV news doctors began changing the shape of local TV news across the country. Of course, there was an episode on consultants.
All right. For the past 3 years, our ratings have been week in and week out absolutely terrible.
Mr. Grant, don't you think there's a little too much emphasis placed on ratings anyway?
Yeah, who cares if our ratings go down a few points?
A single rating point could mean as much as $125,000 in added revenue. Wow. Starting today, I'm bringing in a consultant. His title will be Program Coordinator. And it'll be his job to see if he can find out what our problems are everybody. I want you to meet our new program coordinator, Bob Larson. Bob?
Mary, I am getting fed up with someone 2 years out of journalism school telling me how to improve my copy.
So, Harry, how long can it last?
Then there's the 2004 feature film Anchorman that was set in 1974, when almost everyone in the United States had seen familiar images of news sets, casts of anchors, and snazzy intros with theme music.
Channel 4 News with 5-time Emmy Award-winning anchor Ron Burgundy. Cham Kine Sports. Rick Tamlin Weather. And your reporter in the field, Brian Fantana.
It's Channel 4 News at 6 o'clock.
The Ron Burgundy storyline revolves around the station hiring a co-anchor to add pizzazz to the newscast. Little has changed since the movie premiered. Not surprising, Will Ferrell, playing Burgundy, has been invited to co-anchor real-life newscasts. The new show format is now 58 years old and more than showing its age. If you go back 58 years from the time the concept began in 1965, the Model T Ford had just gone into production. Today, the more than half-century-old news show formula is like a Model T, but still motoring along, digging itself into an ever-deepening rut. For the first few decades, it was state-of-the-art, but now tragically antiquated. It may take another 10 years, but the format will die without ever getting out of that rut. Being stuck in a rut is one of many reasons TV news will not come anywhere close to filling the local news void, even with many markets having upwards of 4 local TV news departments. Another big reason are the journalistic sins that are hiding behind a pretty face of flashy news sets, happy anchors, and slick packaging, and it's getting worse over time. 2 former Washington Post editors co-authored the 2003 book subtitled American Journalism in Peril. They wrote, "It's no secret that the boundary between news programming and entertainment programming became blurred decades ago with the advent of infotainment in local television news in the 1980s, where soft stories or fluff began displacing hard news. We saw some local television news operations around the country that do it better, that do not always lead the news every night with the latest murder, that do not insist that every reporter has to be live on the street in front of an empty courthouse building at 11 o'clock at night." In a similar vein, former television news reporter and commentator Bill Moyers said, "It's a travesty how local reporting is dwindling, because advertising no longer supports newspapers with the means to pay to do the hard digging required for civic honesty. And of course, local television news is a hall of mirrors in a freak show. So local government is at the mercy of rogues, scoundrels, and incompetents who don't have to look over their shoulders for watchdogs on their trail." Moyer's critical look at local TV news led to a political cartoon which cast a clown as a co-anchor. The caption read, "And now sitting in for Bill Moyers, who's in a snit over the so-called encroachment of entertainment values on the news business." Besides being no way local TV news generally will ever fully adhere to a strict journalism code, neither will local TV news departments economize and in essence blow up obsolete methods and equipment, invest in reporters, and put digital first. It's not going to happen. I agree with Danish media expert Bjarke Calvin, who said, "I realize that no one can ever move newspapers and broadcasters into the internet age. It's like trying to push a carpenter specialized in horse-driven wagons to suddenly produce cars. It's an entirely different skill set and mindset." The next topic, the difficulty of dealing with change, whether proactively or reactively. Part of today's local news crisis stems from legacy local television and newspaper news outlets being unable to successfully adapt to disruptive innovation. In this section, I'm going to point out how television news operations in the United States and Germany reacted differently to new and challenging innovation. I experienced the disruptive innovations as a reporter in the United States, as a consultant in Germany, and as an educator in both countries. In the 1970s through the 80s, American television delivered news far faster, at lower cost, arguably better than anywhere else in the world. The U.S. TV news industry further changed proactively. It was monetized to a great extent by the huge financial success of local television news across the country. In comparison, German television news in the 70s and 80s fell behind, resisting change. German television not only clung to old tech and procedures, while local TV news in the States flourished, local TV news in Germany was virtually non-existent. For example, how motion pictures were shot or captured with cameras and then edited. These are the main video film newsgathering disruptions I experienced during my journalism career leading up to present-day smartphone video, beginning with going from silent film, mostly shot by reporters, to sound on film shot by photographers. It was a strong move away from the video journalism concept. The main reason was emphasis placed on ambient sound recorded at the news scene. Then from film cameras to ENG minicams, plus tape decks. No more A/B roll film chains mixed live during newscasts or edited in post-production on refrigerator-sized 2-inch videotape machines. It enabled sophisticated reporter packages, but of course the biggie was live reporting. The next very pleasant disruption, from cameras recording on videotape to tapeless. Finally, editing on computers. Actual editing was faster, more precise, with no generational loss. Just one example of difficulties encountered with disruptive change, going from film cameras to ENG vastly reduced mobility, going from about 17 pounds to about 55. The weight was a killer. Plus, initially, image quality was worse with ENG. Not to mention, the first minicams were extremely expensive. I will not forget the day KSL took delivery of its first megabuck minicam. It was on July 23, 1977. I performed the station's first ENG live shot during the 6 o'clock news. Now consider that almost 50 years after the first minicams, a smartphone weighs about 6 ounces, has much higher resolution than either the film or ENG cameras, and could do a lot more. What was going on in Germany? I made this chart for a presentation in Germany showing the evolution of ENG cameras to today's smartphones. At first, Germany was a leader along with the United States going back to 1935. Then later, Japan became an innovator. But here's the point. Where American news organizations rather quickly transitioned from film to ENG and actually adopted the new technology, German television news outlets struggled, stretched out that transition for more than a decade, and developed a lot of production bad habits along the way. In the United States, which led out, the very difficult film-to-tape transition occurred rather quickly. But in Germany, its slow walking resulted in millions of German marks, then euros wasted on a dual system. Many obsolete film practices foisted on ENG shooting and editing. Money that could have gone into reporting went to keeping obsolescence alive. German television had the money to pay for extravagance. Today, as some news outlets here in the States push for various types of government subsidies for local news, Germany has had subsidies for decades for its national news networks in the form of a monthly TV tax. Germany's guaranteed funding of network news is perhaps the main reason there was little incentive to adopt new methods and technologies. Here's an example of how expensive TV newsgathering was in Germany. When I taught at the University of Dortmund in 1990, I freelanced some television stories on the side. Here I am, the reporter, as part of a 4-man news team. There would have been a 2-man team in the United States. There's the cameraman, sound man, driver, and the news vehicle is a Mercedes, not a Volkswagen. In a way, it's a 5-person team because neither reporters nor cameraman edited video. That's a separate person in Germany, most often a woman. If the reporter became a VJ, it seems that much of the money being paid other team members could go to the video journalist. I think the history and practice of live reporting deserves a closer look because I believe it's an essential element to local news being born again. But the field production of live shots needs to be way less expensive, far more mobile than with legacy ENG and SNG trucks, plus more journalistic and less theatrical. The key moment in ENG live deployment history occurred in 1974 at KMOX TV in St. Louis. Reporter Sandy Gilmore, who I knew when he earlier worked in Salt Lake City, interrupted regular programming with updates on a bad windstorm. It had been arranged spur of the moment, using an ENG van cobbled together by the station's engineers. CBS President Arthur Taylor happened to be at the St. Louis CBS affiliate during Sandy's live remote. Taylor designated KMOX as a pilot for ENG adoption. ENG fully replaced film rather quickly across the United States, but not in Germany. This is one of the live shots I did over the following years, among them reports from the station's helicopter that was equipped with a microwave dish. On November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, a pivotal event in world history, but no German television news outlet covered it live. Instead, it was NBC television that captured the event live for American television viewers.
NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw. Tonight, from West Berlin.
Good evening, live from the Berlin Wall on the most historic night in this wall's history. What you see behind me is a celebration of this new policy announced today by the East German government that now, for the first time since the wall was erected in 1961, people will be able to move through freely. This crowd has gathered.
It was a big embarrassment for German television. Yet it would still be slow to react. When the wall fell in 1989, I'd been consulting for WDR television in Germany and had tried to convince them to source American live reporting technology and know-how. Prior to NBC's live shot at the Berlin Wall, I'd arranged for WDR's news director to attend an RTNDA convention here in the States to make contact with ENG and SNG vendors, but his network managers rejected his proposals. Germany was not finished playing live shot catch-up. A year later, German television news outlets got caught again. I was teaching journalism at the University of Dortmund and still consulting for WDR when the United States began bombing Iraq. CNN reporter Bernard Shaw was in Baghdad and broadcast the raid live. It was a watershed event for CNN that catapulted the channel past the 3 big American networks in war coverage. Once again, German television failed to cover a major world event live, was again embarrassed by American news technology and newsgathering know-how. In March 1991, as the war progressed, I wrote a piece for Germany's leading journalism magazine. It was critical of Germany's outmoded video newsgathering technologies and methods. It was about its poor use of video and film, and no mobile ENG deployment, as again shown by the Gulf War, and its newscast weather images were out of the 60s. Then I wrote a story for the Radio and Television News Directors Association magazine about the impact CNN had on Germany's war coverage. The article said German TV news was still playing SNG catch-up, that many Germans tuned to CNN for war coverage, and that their TV news video editing practices were antiquated, slow, and expensive. Backing up a few months on the timeline, was in December 1990 that I became involved in Germany's adoption of American live reporting know-how. In December, Studio Hamburg, the production arm of NDR, WDR's sister station, the one I was consulting for, assembled Germany's first SNG truck. I arranged for the truck's use to begin training WDR reporters. But then, bureaucratic bungling. WDR management delayed final approval, and a German private network, Sat1, contracted for exclusive use of Studio Hamburg's truck. So I jumped ship. I contracted with Sat1 to do live remote training for its reporters. In May 1991, I began live shot workshops at Sat1 News headquarters in Hamburg and at its various regional satellite newsrooms. Besides being the first to do live shot training in Germany, my concepts were later incorporated in one of Germany's most widely used TV reporting textbooks. My work for Sat1 expanded beyond training. They also lagged behind the United States in presentation methods and technologies. I introduced the American-style news show format along with a new news set built in San Diego. I coordinated the acquisition of advanced weather graphics through an American provider, as shown in this promo.
Sat.1 News mit Dieter Kronzucker ab 30. März.
Frühlingshaft war das Wetter und jetzt wollen wir mal schauen.
Exklusiv in den Sat.1 News. Wetter mit der 5-Tage-Vorhersage ab 30. März.
The weather technology I introduced to Sat1 compelled all German television stations to modernize their weather. I engaged Kavoris in Minneapolis to design and install the system. The process began with an existing weather satellite over Europe, which transmitted data across the ocean to a satellite dish at Kavoris. There, the company created computerized satellite imagery and combined it with the forecast. That data was uploaded from another dish at Kavoris to a satellite hovering over South America. Then it was transmitted to a downlink on the roof of the television station in Hamburg. In this shot, I'm helping integrate the imagery into a new set built in San Diego. The resulting weathercast was far more up-to-date and much less expensive than weather data provided in Germany. Besides Sat1, I later consulted on news sets for DSF Munich, N24 Berlin, and Puls TV in Berlin, its local news outlet, funded in part by Time Warner and George Soros. I helped produce The Open, which you'll see has American local news characteristics.
Puls TV, 1A für Berlin-Brandenburg.
Uhr, Pulsschlag 8, die Nachrichten für Berlin-Brandenburg, unsere Top-Themen. Aus für Hartfelder, Sieg für Klein, Brandenburger CDU fällt Entscheidung. Spielspaß und Spannung, die Kleinsten feiern ihren ganz speziellen Tag.
Right at the time, in 1996, I was in Berlin helping Puls TV. The seeds for the demise of broadcast news and linear news delivery had been sown. A disruptive innovation, the Internet, and within years, on-demand streamed video began to shake up how video news is gathered and presented. In 1995, Netscape Navigator and Internet Explorer began a browser war and made Internet access a lot easier. In March, Time magazine published a special edition titled Welcome to Cyberspace. It said publishers are setting up Internet domains. Reuters, ABC Television, and the New York Times went online. In 1996, Microsoft and NBC created MSNBC Cable and Internet. The debate was, will the Internet replace the printed page? Pew Research in 1998 said 20% of Americans go online at least once a week to get news. When I was consulting in Germany, the new show concept was already more than 20 years old, but still pretty much state of the art. But now it's more than past its sell-by date. It's mystifying, but today, after almost 60 years, the new show format drags on. As it drags on, it continues to erode journalism ethics. One example of that, which I will highlight in the next section, is the black hole live shot. The widespread use of black hole live shots shows the unethical depths to which local television news has sunk. It's easier to diagnose and bring to light the disreputable practice than to stop it. Illegitimate broadcast live remotes are so pervasive that they may have already undermined any future legitimate use of genuine live shots by online local news providers. 4 years ago, I wrote about the senseless live shot problem in an article for TV Tech's online magazine. To justify the high cost of ENG crews and live trucks, journalists often report live from scenes of stories that occurred hours before and no longer unfold. Reporters are seen standing in front of empty buildings or at inactive news scenes, often at night, thus the expression black hole live shot. Google it. TV reporters by the hundreds go along with it. Dr. C.A. Tuggle, a journalism professor at the University of North Carolina and co-author of a broadcast news textbook, says, "Little is less enthralling than watching a local television news hound at 11 p.m. report live outside a dark municipal building, hours after the city council has gone home." It was 23 years ago Tuggle surveyed news directors and senior reporters. Significant percentages of reporters and news directors believed that available technology often led to coverage beyond stories' real worth. Many thought the prevailing attitude was, "A live truck shall not gather dust," and that trucks remained at news scenes too long after reporters relayed what little news there was. News directors typically are closer to management and care more about promotion, audience size, and the bottom line than reporters do. Even a substantial percentage of news directors thought that black hole live shots are goofy, but many of them feel pressured to do it, like they're between a rock and a hard place. If anything, it's worse today. I randomly picked a live shot from a recent KUTV 10 p.m. newscast. There it is, introduced by two anchors when one could have done it, the obligatory, mandatory nightly live shot reporting from a location that had nothing to do with a story that involved a purported murder in another state that had occurred weeks before.
In a 2 News exclusive, a veteran from Provo was murdered while on vacation overseas. And now that veteran's family is struggling to get his remains back to Utah.
Amanda Gilbert is live near Provo tonight with why they can't bring him home. Amanda.
A friend is speaking for the family. They just don't have the money to return his body home from the Philippines.
Black hole live shots are so contagious, the U.S. epidemic spread to Germany. Germany's dominant, most watched television newscast, Tagesschau, unfortunately, features them almost daily. At least I tried when I conducted Germany's first live shot training, which included Tagesschau reporters. I warned that in the States, live reporting had been turned into a promotional gimmick. It's also there in my workshop manual. That all fell on deaf ears. Now this story gets really sad. Instead of condemning black hole live shots, many journalism schools are teaching it, along with the outdated news show concept. I'll first single out BYU, where I taught. BYU calls its student newscast Newsline the next generation of news, which of course is promotional hype. Multi-anchors on a set and linear news delivery is not the next generation, but from many, many past generations. It's also unfortunate that BYU, like too many journalism schools, trains students to do black hole live remotes. Here's a condensed video of one I picked at random.
Welcome to Universe Live. It's Tuesday, October 12th. I'm Allie O'Rulian.
And I'm Catherine Bennett.
Universe Live reporter Katie Ann Powell is at BYU. Katie Ann, you found a lab that fits in the palm of your hand.
When most people think of a lab, they think of people in white lab coats and a big room. But because of the new technologies at BYU, a lab can be smaller than a grain of rice. So come with me into the lab where the light is yellow to make these unique chips. Although these chips might seem very small, they're an open door for the science and medical field. Reporting from Provo for Universe Live, I'm Katie Ann Powell.
Thanks, Katie Ann.
Next, USC Annenberg student news show, See It Live. Same thing, dual anchors on a news set, introing a black hole live shot. Here's a condensed video.
Hi, I'm Bella Durgan-Johnson.
And I'm Eric Ye. With booths, food, tents, and even a Ferris wheel, Conquest looks to be exciting this year. Reporter Avery Goodman is live in McCarthy Quad to tell us more.
This year marks the 18th celebration of the annual Conquest Festival at USC. On the Thursday of Rivalry Week every year, the USC Concert Committee organizes a free celebration for USC students to get hyped for the big game.
And then there's so much cool stuff here. Like, I didn't know, but over there we just got like free concert tickets. So, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you. Doors opened at 5 p.m. and as you can see behind me, there are a lot of people already lining up to get into the concert.
You would expect better from Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism, one of America's best. But its student newscasts are the same old, same old. Again, a black hole live shot picked entirely at random, reporting on an event that took place the week before. Yes, the week before.
Those stories and more tonight on the Northwestern News Report.
It's your news
right now.
Northwestern University graduate workers marched last week to advocate for workers' rights. NNN's Ellie Skelly is live from the Rock to tell us more. Ellie?
Hi, Jenny. I'm live at the Rock, where marchers stopped before continuing on to the office of Provost Kathleen Haggerty.
Many other journalism schools are drinking the same Action News Kool-Aid. It seems that if the local news crisis is ever going to be resolved, journalism schools need to become part of a solution and not part of the problem. What should journalism schools do? Place separate print, broadcast, and digital tracks under a single journalism umbrella, which would simply begin with basic news reporting and writing 101. Prioritize video journalism and smartphone news gathering instruction under that umbrella. Put digital first for campus news media. Make it more than a slogan. Beef up or begin the campus electronic news publication. Close the print newspaper if one still remains. Discontinue the linear broadcast newscast if there is one. No more news shows, no more sets, no more anchor training. Conduct studies, research that support commercial video journalism and smartphone news gathering. On the commercial front, it's time. It's time to put print newspapers to rest. It's time to put the broadcast news show to rest. Put them both in the same grave. It's also time for the birth of a new form of local news coverage, centered on smartphone news gathering and focused on beat reporting, technologies and methods that blanket local communities with high-value journalism. Not born again, but born anew. Journalism and democracy need to be saved before it's too late. Thanks for watching. If you have questions or comments, email lpacker636@gmail.com.